entire class of young students with disabilities vanished without a trace during what was supposed to be a routine field trip to Everglades National Park. For 48 hours, no one knew what happened, until a park ranger stumbled upon something deep in the swamp. What he found didn't just answer questions. It raised terrifying new ones about who was behind it all. Inside a dim, buzzing police station, Sarah Miller sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the clutter of empty coffee cups piling up in front of her, each one marking another hour without her son. 2 full days had passed since Ethan went missing, and every second felt like slow torture. Beside her, her husband Mark sat hunched and silent, the exhaustion written all over him, his shirt wrinkled, his jaw shadowed with stubble, his hands clenched in his lap. Detective Garcia entered with a file thick enough to make Sarah sit upright, her heart pounding. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," she began. "I know these last 2 days have been unimaginable, but I want to share where we are." Sarah's eyes welled as she clung to any scrap of news. Ethan wasn't just her 10-year-old boy. He was her whole world. He needed extra care, lived with developmental challenges, and never went anywhere without his oversized glasses or his favorite bright orange shirt. "That's what he wore the last time she saw him," Detective Garcia continued, her voice calm but tight with frustration. "We've mobilized every available officer and search team across 3 counties. We've done aerial sweeps, combed the park on foot, and set up road checkpoints within a 100-mile radius. But so far, no leads." Mark gripped Sarah's hand under the table. "How is that even possible?" he asked quietly. "An entire bus full of children doesn't just vanish." On a whiteboard across the room, 10 school photos stared back at them, smiling faces frozen in time. 2 teachers, Ms. Johnson and Ms. Torres, had accompanied them. Only one adult, Mr. Bai. Wilson didn't board that bus, and he was the only one who made it back. Detective Garcia nodded. "That's what makes this so strange." She pointed to a timeline scrawled neatly across the board. "Let's go over it again." Sarah's eyes locked onto Ethan's photo. His awkward smile, his wild cowlick, those glasses that never stayed up. "The class left the visitor center at exactly 9:30 a.m., Garcia explained. "They boarded a park-owned tour bus. Mr. Wilson stayed behind due to limited space. The trip was supposed to last 3 hours and return by 12:30, but when the bus didn't come back, park rangers tried radio contact. After 30 minutes of silence, they sent out search teams." Mark ran a hand down his face, his voice barely a whisper. "And they found nothing?" "Not a single trace," Garcia confirmed. "No sign of an accident, no tire tracks." It was as if the bus disappeared into thin air. Sarah stared at the board. Every timestamp, every note, felt like a clock ticking further away from Ethan. "If this was a kidnapping," she asked, "why haven't we received any ransom demands? Isn't that how these things usually go?" Garcia nodded slowly. "That's the strange part. In typical abductions, the suspects make contact within 24 hours. But this? Nothing, not a single call, text, or message." The silence said everything. If money wasn't the motive, what was? "We questioned Mr. Wilson thoroughly," Garcia continued. "At first, he was a suspect simply because he wasn't on the bus. But security footage confirms he never left the visitor center. Dozens of witnesses saw him panicking when the bus didn't return, calling the teachers nonstop. Sarah remembered him well. He'd been kind and committed, always patient with the kids. The idea that he could be involved had never made sense to her. Then Garcia paused, and her tone shifted. "We found the bus," she said, "late last night." Sarah gasped, leaning forward, hope suddenly bursting through the fog. What came next would leave them speechless. Sarah barely managed to speak through the exhaustion gripping her entire body. "And the children?" she asked, her voice trembling. Detective Garcia didn't need to answer. The look on her face said it all, before the words even came. The bus was empty, she said quietly. It had been driven nearly 7 miles off the main route, partially hidden in a remote part of the Everglades. Our forensics team is processing it now, but there are no signs of violence. No struggle. Mark leaned forward, confused and desperate. So what does that mean? Garcia hesitated, then said, It suggests the children and teachers either left the bus voluntarily or were convinced to do so without resistance. Sarah shook her head, her voice rising. That doesn't make any sense. These were special needs children. Ethan panics in unfamiliar places. Some of them can't even speak. 3 of them rely on wheelchairs full-time. That's why, Garcia said soberly, we now believe this was a coordinated operation. Multiple people had to be involved. It was carefully planned. She walked over to the whiteboard and pointed to the photo of the driver, Carlos Mendez, a longtime park employee with a spotless 12-year record. We're digging deeper into his background now, she added. At this point, we can't rule out that he was either coerced or complicit. Mark looked up sharply. Could this have been aimed at one child specifically, and the others were just taken along? We're interviewing all of the families, Garcia replied, looking into any past threats, financial activity, unusual communications, anything that might point to motive. So far, we've found no clear link. Sarah stared at the children's photos again, her eyes landing on each familiar face, classmates who had been to their home, birthday parties, school plays. Ethan had always struggled socially, but in this class, he had finally found a place where he was understood, where he belonged. Maybe it's not about one child, Mark said suddenly. Maybe it's about the group. This is an elite private program, Oak Ridge Academy. Tuition is nearly $40,000 a year. Every family here has serious money. Garcia nodded slowly. That's one of our working theories. These families could be high-value targets in a ransom scheme, but with no contact from anyone, it's still just speculation. Sarah's head throbbed. The idea of Ethan lost somewhere in the swamps, without his medication, without structure, without them, was unbearable. What now? She asked, barely able to speak. At first light, in 4 hours, we launch a full-scale grid search, Garcia said. We've called in volunteers from nearby counties. There'll be airboats, drones with thermal cameras, and K-9 units trained for swamp terrain. If they're still out there, we will find them. That word echoed in Sarah's head. If they were still in the park, if they were still alive, Try to get some rest if you can, Garcia added gently. There's a cot set up in the break room. We'll wake you the moment there's an update. But Sarah knew she wouldn't sleep. Not while Ethan was out there, scared, disoriented, wondering why his mother hadn't come yet. Suddenly, the door burst open. A uniformed officer rushed in, breathless. Detective Garcia, he said, ignoring formalities. We've found something. A park ranger just reported a discovery. Several wheelchairs abandoned deep in the swamp. Sarah felt her world spin. Wheelchairs? She repeated, her voice barely audible. The officer hesitated, glancing at her. Then came the second blow. And 2 bodies, ma'am, he said quietly. The words hit like a punch to the chest. Sarah felt the floor drop away beneath her. Mark pulled her close, steadying her as her knees weakened. Do we know who? Sarah couldn't even finish the sentence. We don't have IDs yet, Garcia said firmly, grabbing her jacket and radio. Let's not jump to conclusions. I need to get to the scene. We're going with you, Mark said immediately, lifting Sarah to her feet. I can't allow that. It's an active crime scene, Garcia replied. That's our son out there, Sarah snapped, her voice suddenly full of fire. Either you take us with you, or we'll follow you anyway. After a long pause, Garcia nodded. You can come, but you stay in your vehicle. Do not interfere with the scene. I'm serious. Within minutes, a caravan of police vehicles was racing toward the swamp, toward answers no one was ready for. The early morning darkness was broken only by the flashing lights of the convoy. No sirens, just silence. Sarah and Mark followed closely in their SUV, the weight of unspoken fears pressing down on both of them. Her hand gripped Mark's on the center console, fingers clenched white. "It might not be him," Mark said, his voice barely holding together. "We can't assume the worst." Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were already spiraling. Ethan didn't use a wheelchair all the time, but he often needed one on longer trips, especially when his balance faltered or fatigue took over. She couldn't stop wondering, was one of those wheelchairs his? The vehicles turned off the main road and onto an unmarked dirt trail, barely wide enough for the convoy. Eventually, even the police SUVs had to stop. From there, they continued on foot, the ground turning soft and slick beneath them. Mark helped Sarah through the dense, wet terrain until they stepped into a small clearing, and the scene stopped them cold. Dozens of officers were already there, their flashlight beams cutting through the fog. Forensics teams in white suits worked methodically, placing evidence markers, snapping photos, and preserving every detail. The air was thick with humidity and tension. 7 wheelchairs sat partially submerged in the murky swamp water. Brightly colored, pink, blue, green, purple, they looked shockingly out of place against the muddy browns and deep greens of the Everglades. Some had broken footrests, others had wheels bent unnaturally. They hadn't just been discarded. They had been damaged. Detective Garcia appeared, blocking their path. "This is as far as you go," she said firmly, placing a steady hand on Mark's shoulder. Sarah leaned around her, scanning the clearing. Her voice came out like a whisper. "The bodies?" Garcia's expression softened slightly. "They've been bagged. They're being moved to the coroner's van now." Sarah watched as 2 black body bags were carefully carried out of the swamp. One was clearly smaller than the other. Suddenly, a cry rang out from the other side of the perimeter. Another couple broke past the officers, David and Elizabeth Jacobson. Sarah recognized them instantly. Their daughter, Sophie, was one of Ethan's classmates. "That's Sophie's backpack," Elizabeth screamed, pointing at a small purple bag covered in butterfly patches, sitting on a tarp beside other evidence. David dropped to his knees in the mud, his anguish echoing through the trees. Officers held Elizabeth back as she tried to rush forward. Garcia moved quickly, guiding them to a quieter area. When she returned, her face carried the weight of what she'd just confirmed. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," she said gently. "We've preliminarily identified one of the victims as Sophie Jacobson, based on her backpack and physical details. The other appears to be Ms. Johnson, one of the teachers." Sarah's heart shattered for the Jacobsons, but alongside the grief came a shameful flicker of relief. It wasn't Ethan, and just as quickly, guilt followed. It made her sick to her stomach. "How did they—" Mark began, but the words stuck in his throat. Garcia lowered her voice. "Both victims were killed execution style. Gunshot wounds to the head. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't exposure. It was intentional." Sarah felt the world tilt, and Mark caught her instinctively. "The wheelchairs?" he asked. "They were purposely damaged," Garcia replied. "It suggests the attackers no longer needed them after choosing who to keep. This was calculated." The implication was clear. The other children may still be alive. But something tugged at Sarah's thoughts. She stepped forward slightly, eyes locked on the scene. "It's the way they're arranged," she said. "The wheelchairs. They're not just thrown around. They're set in a semicircle." Garcia turned to look again, eyes narrowing. "You're right. That's not random. This looks staged, like they wanted these to be found." "But why?" Mark asked. "If they're trying to disappear, why leave such an obvious sign?" "Maybe it's a message," Garcia said, "or a distraction." Just then, a man in a medical examiner's jacket approached. He nodded respectfully to the Millers, then addressed Garcia. "Preliminary time of death is 10 to 12 hours ago," he reported, "which means They were alive for at least a full day after the abduction. Sarah's heart pounded at the implications. If Sophie and Ms. Johnson were alive for a day, what happened during that time, and where were the others now? The timeline was now horrifyingly clear. Sophie and Ms. Johnson had been alive just 10 hours earlier, which meant the other children, including Ethan, could still be alive right now. "We need to expand the search," Sarah urged, her voice sharp with urgency. "If they killed 2 of them here, the rest could still be nearby." "We already are," Detective Garcia assured her. "We're widening the grid. Every resource is in play. Aerial thermal scans will begin at sunrise." Mark wrapped his arm around Sarah as they stood at the edge of the clearing, watching investigators continue their grim work. The faint glow of dawn began to bleed across the Everglades, revealing just how vast and treacherous the landscape really was. The empty wheelchairs stood like ghostly monuments in the murky water, mute witnesses to unspeakable cruelty. "He's alive," Sarah whispered, mostly to herself. "I would know if he wasn't. I would feel it." Mark didn't respond, but he kept his eyes on the horizon as the sun slowly rose, casting long shadows across the water. Somewhere out there, Ethan. By mid-morning, the quiet swamp had transformed into a media frenzy. Helicopters hovered overhead, their blades thudding like a distant war drum. At the park's visitor entrance, news vans packed the lot, their satellite dishes stabbing at the sky. Reporters delivered breaking news segments as squad cars continued to arrive. The story had exploded. Headlines across every major outlet read, "2 disabled children found dead in Florida Everglades, 10 still missing." It was now a national emergency. The FBI officially took over the case, converting the main visitor center into a tactical command post. Leading the effort was Special Agent Danielle Daniels, a steely woman in her 40s with short-cropped hair and the demeanor of someone who had stared evil in the face before. She stepped up to a makeshift podium outside, flanked by local police and park officials, ready to address a sea of cameras and microphones. At approximately 5:42 this morning, she began, search teams recovered the bodies of 2 individuals linked to the disappearance from Oak Ridge Academy. We can now confirm the victims are Sophie Jacobson, age 9, and Katherine Johnson, age 34, a faculty member at the school. Her voice remained composed, professional. "Out of respect for the families and due to the active investigation, we will not be releasing further details at this time regarding the condition or cause of death." Then came a barrage of questions, shouted from all directions. Is this being treated as a terrorist act? Were there ransom demands prior to the killings? Are any suspects in custody? What about the other children? Do you believe they're still alive? Agent Daniels raised a hand, silencing the chaos. "We are following multiple leads. Every available agency and resource is working to locate the remaining children and teacher. If anyone has information, no matter how minor, contact the FBI tip line immediately." But just as she turned to leave, a communications officer rushed up with a folded note. She read it carefully. Something in her eyes tightened, barely visible, but unmistakable. "This press conference is now concluded," she said sharply. "We'll issue updates as appropriate." Without another word, she turned and walked swiftly back into the visitor center, where the families of the missing children were gathered in a private room. As soon as she entered, the room fell into a heavy, aching silence. 8 sets of parents waited, some holding hands, some staring blankly into space. The Jacobsons were notably absent, taken to formally identify their daughter and begin arrangements no parent should ever have to make. Agent Daniels didn't ease into the moment. "We've received a ransom demand," she said plainly, her tone all business. The room erupted in gasps. "It came 15 minutes ago, sent to the school's administrative email," she continued. "They're demanding $2 million in cash within 24 hours. If we don't comply, more children will be executed." James Whitaker, father of missing twins Ryan and Tyler, stood up abruptly, A sharp, assertive man with a finance background, he had been growing more combative by the hour. "Let me see it," he demanded. Daniels turned a tablet toward the parents. The message was displayed on screen. Its tone was cold, methodical, terrifying. "We have your children. Sophie Jacobson and Katherine Johnson were eliminated to prove we are serious. The rest will be released when we receive $2 million in unmarked bills. You have 24 hours. Each 12-hour delay will result in another execution. The wealthy parents of Oak Ridge can afford this. Consider it a small price for your children's lives." Attached to the message was a photograph. The photo was dim and grainy, but unmistakable. 8 frightened children and 1 adult, Ms. Reyes, were huddled together on the floor of a dark, windowless room. Concrete walls surrounded them, and a single weak bulb cast long shadows. Some of the children leaned into each other for comfort, their faces pale and tear-streaked. But Sarah only saw one thing: Ethan. He was there, dressed in his orange shirt, his glasses missing, his cheeks stained with tears, but he was alive. "Ethan," she whispered, instinctively reaching toward the screen before pulling her hand back. Her heart clenched. He looked terrified, but from what she could tell, unhurt. Agent Daniels stood beside the screen, her voice calm but firm. "The timing of this ransom message is deliberate," she said. "It arrived just minutes after the media publicly confirmed the bodies. They waited for the coverage, waited to shock the world, before demanding payment." The tension in the room was suffocating. "They think we won't pay?" Rebecca Chen asked, her voice rising. Her daughter Lily, who had Down syndrome, was barely visible in the back of the photo. "I'll sell my house today if that's what it takes." Daniels continued, now revealing something even more disturbing. The message included an appendix with detailed financial records on each family: stock holdings, business valuations, property portfolios, information you don't just find online. A chilling silence fell. It was clear this wasn't random. Someone had done their homework or had access to it. "This points to insider knowledge," Daniels confirmed. Within seconds, several parents jumped to action. The Whitakers offered to front half the $2 million ransom. Others began calling banks, arranging to liquidate assets. It didn't matter what the FBI said, these were their children. But Agent Daniels raised her hand. "I need to be absolutely clear," she said. "The FBI has a strict policy. We do not authorize ransom payments. Ever." James Whitaker snapped, pointing directly at Sarah and Mark. "That's your child in that photo. What's your policy on that?" "I understand your anger," Daniels replied coolly. "But we've seen this before. Paying ransom rarely leads to safe returns. Once the money changes hands, there's no reason for them to keep anyone alive." Sarah's voice cracked. "So what are we supposed to do? Just hope? Wait for the next child to die?" "We are using every tool available to track them," Daniels said. "Cyber forensics teams are analyzing the email's origin. Crypto experts are monitoring for movement of ransom funds. Tactical units are on standby for immediate recovery the moment we have a location." Mark spoke up quietly. "And if you don't find them in time?" Daniels didn't answer right away. "We need to buy time," she said finally. "We're preparing a public statement. We'll announce that we do not negotiate with kidnappers. It's standard procedure to delay and to pressure them into a mistake." Rebecca Chen's voice was hollow. "You're using our kids as bait." "We're trying to save them," Daniels replied, eyes locked on hers. "Every choice we make is to bring them home alive." Within the hour, the announcement was on every major network. Agent Daniels, flanked by flags and law enforcement officials, looked straight into the cameras and declared, "The United States does not negotiate with criminals. The perpetrators will be brought to justice." Sarah watched it from a break-room TV in stunned silence. Her stomach twisted. "They're going to kill another child," she whispered. "They'll think we're not taking them seriously." Before Mark could reply, Daniels re-entered the room, this time with Detective Garcia beside her. "We believe we know how this was orchestrated," Daniels said. She explained that the financial information in the ransom note wasn't just gathered from public records. It was too specific, too private. "Someone with direct access to school records is involved," she said. "Scholarship applications, tuition files, aid requests, they all contain sensitive financial data." Sarah's breath caught. "Mr. Wilson?" she asked, thinking of the male teacher who'd stayed behind. Garcia shook her head. "We've actually placed Mr. Wilson under protective custody. If anything, we believe he might have been deliberately excluded. He could be a witness, not a suspect." "Then who?" Mark asked. Daniels responded, "We're investigating all staff with access to student records, anyone who could have seen those financial disclosures. They would know exactly which families could afford to pay and how much they'd sacrifice to get their children back." Sarah stared at the floor, her world spinning. Someone had looked at her child and at every one of those innocent kids and seen a dollar sign. Someone had calculated just how far a parent would go when driven by grief and terror. And now, with the FBI's refusal to pay, that person, that monster, was deciding which child would be the next to die. By the time the sun reached its peak, exhaustion had driven Sarah to do something she hadn't done in days: go home, just for a moment. Mark refused to leave the command center, unwilling to miss even a single update. But Sarah needed air, quiet, space. Their Mediterranean-style home in Coral Gables, usually a warm refuge filled with laughter and routine, now felt hollow and cold. The absence of Ethan hung in every corner like a weight. She walked slowly down the hall, past family photos and framed art projects, until she stopped at Ethan's bedroom. His door, still decorated with dinosaur decals, was a punch to the chest. Dinosaurs had been his latest obsession. Paleontology books, plastic figurines, endless questions about fossils and time. She stepped inside. Nothing had changed. His bed was still unmade. A Lego project sat half-built on his desk. His favorite books lay scattered on the nightstand, the pages worn from rereading. She opened his medication drawer. Inside were the anti-seizure pills he needed every single day, specialized meds in unmarked containers, useless to anyone who didn't know the exact schedule. If he missed too many doses, he could suffer a seizure, a serious one. The thought of him out there, scared and untreated, made her stomach twist. She gathered the medication into her purse. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. Normally she'd ignore it, but there was nothing normal about her life anymore. "Hello?" she answered, her voice tight. A voice responded, digitally altered, genderless, and mechanical. "Is this Sarah Miller, mother of Ethan?" Her pulse spiked. "Yes," she whispered, already reaching for the FBI-issued recording device. "Who is this?" "That doesn't matter," the voice said coldly. "What matters is your son. He's missed 2 doses of his medication." Sarah froze. They knew. They knew Ethan's condition, his schedule. "Since the FBI has declined our collective demand," the voice continued, "we're offering individual arrangements. $500,000, just for your son, not the others." Sarah's heart thundered. "You bring the money. You get Ethan back. Simple." "I need to hear him," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need proof he's alive." "Check your text messages in 2 minutes," the voice replied. "You'll have your proof of life. But hear me clearly. If you contact law enforcement, Ethan dies. This offer expires in 3 hours. After that, we move on, to parents who care more." The call ended. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of Ethan's room, the weight of the decision crashing down on her. She wanted to call Mark, to call the FBI, but what if they were watching, What if the kidnappers knew which parents were cooperating? 2 minutes later, her phone buzzed. She opened the message with shaking hands and nearly dropped the phone. A photo. Ethan, holding that day's Miami Herald, his face pale, his glasses gone, red rims around his eyes, but alive, looking directly into the camera. He was wearing a gray t-shirt now, not his usual orange one. A digital timestamp in the corner confirmed it had been taken just 28 minutes ago. Then another text arrived. $500,000 cash. Come alone. 1 hour. No police. Warehouse district. Building 17. Portide Industrial Park. Loading dock entrance. Or he dies. Sarah's mind was spinning. The FBI had made their position crystal clear. No ransoms. But this was her son. The kidnappers knew what they were doing. They were splintering the parents, turning their terror into leverage. She raced to the home office, opened the wall safe hidden behind Mark's diplomas. Inside, emergency cash, documents, but only around $3,000, nowhere near enough. Then she ran to her jewelry box, her engagement ring, the diamond earrings from her 30th, a Tiffany bracelet from her mother, Mark's Rolex from their anniversary. Everything of value went into her purse, along with the medications. Next stop, the bank. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel the whole drive. The branch manager, who had known the Millers for years, looked concerned as she approached the counter, clearly distressed. "Mrs. Miller, is everything all right?" "Family emergency," she said, not meeting his eyes. "I need $500,000, now, in cash." The manager looked stunned. "I'm sorry. Even with your balances, we can't provide that much on the spot. The most we could release today is about $70,000. Anything more would take time to transfer and prepare." "Then give me the 70, she said quickly. "As fast as you can." 20 minutes later, she walked out of the bank with an envelope full of cash, nowhere near enough, but all she had. She sat in the car, staring at it, her heart racing. Another text buzzed. Building 17, Portide Industrial Park, loading dock, 1 hour, come alone, or he dies. She stared at the screen, then at the envelope of cash, and the bag full of jewelry. It wasn't enough, but she had to try. She had to. Before leaving, Sarah scribbled a quick note for Mark. Something vague but just believable enough. Following a lead about Ethan. A neighbor mentioned seeing something odd yesterday. We'll call soon. Love you. It was a poor lie, but it was all she could risk. If Mark suspected what she was actually doing, he'd call the FBI immediately, and that could cost Ethan his life. At their bedroom door, she hesitated, then pushed it open and headed straight for Mark's nightstand. The gun was there, a 9mm Glock they'd bought for home protection years ago. Sarah had never been comfortable with it, but Mark insisted they both learn how to use it safely and confidently. Now her hands didn't tremble as she checked the chamber. Loaded, she placed it carefully into her purse. The cash, the jewelry, the gun, Ethan's medication. She was ready. Sarah climbed back into her SUV and entered the coordinates from the kidnapper's message. The route led to a desolate industrial zone near the port, about 40 minutes away. As she drove, her eyes flicked constantly to the rearview mirror, haunted by the thought that she might be followed by the kidnappers, the FBI, or both. Every logical thought screamed that this was a trap, that even if she paid, they had no reason to let Ethan go. But logic didn't matter anymore, not to a mother watching the clock run out on her son. The Portide Industrial Park looked like a ghost town. Boarded windows, sagging roofs, graffiti-stained walls. The buildings leaned like forgotten relics of a better time. Building 17 stood at the far edge of the cracked lot, half hidden behind tall weeds and rusted fencing. She parked behind it, away from the road and any possible witnesses. The silence was unnerving. Just the distant clank of cargo machinery and the cry of gulls overhead. The loading dock door was slightly raised, about 3 feet off the ground, just enough space to duck beneath. With her heart pounding, Sarah grabbed the purse and walked toward the entrance. Please let him be alive. Please let this work. She crouched low and slid under the door into the cavernous dark. Inside, the air was heavy with mildew, rust, and a chemical stench she couldn't place. Narrow shafts of sunlight sliced through broken boards high on the walls, casting eerie beams into the gloom. Her footsteps echoed. "Hello?" she called. "I'm here about my son." A voice answered from the shadows, male, firm, commanding. "Stop right there. Put the bag on the floor. Back away 6 feet." She did exactly as told. Kneeling slowly, she set down the purse and took careful steps backward. Her heart thundered in her chest. 2 masked men stepped out of the darkness. Both wore black ski masks. The taller one held a handgun low at his side, but with practiced ease, like someone trained. A scar ran from his jaw down his neck, just visible beneath the mask. The shorter one moved forward cautiously, his weapon aimed squarely at her. He knelt beside the bag and began searching. Sarah held her breath. "Where's my son?" she asked, forcing calm into her voice. He didn't answer, just opened the envelope and quickly counted the money. 70 grand? He snapped, glaring up at her. "We said 500. "I brought jewelry too," Sarah said quickly, her voice shaking. "Diamonds, designer, worth more than the difference. I couldn't get more cash on short notice." The man pulled out the jewelry, a diamond ring, a watch, earrings. He looked them over with surprising precision, like someone used to fencing valuables. "Maybe 200 tops," he muttered. "Not what we agreed on." "Where's my son?" Sarah repeated, louder this time. The taller man gave a silent signal. At the far end of the warehouse, a side door creaked open. A third man appeared, roughly pushing a wheelchair forward. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Ethan. His tiny frame was slumped in a large adult wheelchair, wrists bound to the armrests with zip ties. Duct tape covered his mouth. His orange shirt was gone, replaced with a plain gray one. But his eyes, wide, frightened, locked onto hers the second he saw her. "Ethan," she gasped, stepping forward instinctively. The tall man raised his gun. "This isn't how this works," he said, calm but deadly serious. "The deal was 500,000 for the boy." "I'll get the rest," she pleaded. "Please, just give me time. Look at him, he needs his medication. Please, just let me give him what he needs." But there was no sign of sympathy in the gunman's eyes, only calculation. "There's a prescription in my purse," Sarah pleaded. "He'll have seizures without it." The masked men huddled, whispering and glancing between her and Ethan. The scarred leader finally approached. "We have a problem," he said coldly. "You've seen too much. The plan was to release the boy quietly, but you didn't bring enough money. We need leverage." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Take me instead," she blurted. "Let him go, and I'll stay. My husband will bring the rest." The leader considered it, then nodded. "That could work. Get the kid back in the van. We'll move to the harbor location." That word, harbor, snapped in Sarah's mind. That's where the others were. "No," she cried. "Let me give him his meds first." "You don't give orders," the man replied, and without warning, struck her with his gun. Sarah collapsed, blood dripping down her face. Through blurred vision, she saw Ethan crying, struggling in his restraints. "Get in the van or we drug you," the man said. "Your choice." "I'll go," Sarah whispered, staggering to her feet. "Just don't hurt him." As they collected the money and jewelry, Sarah stayed alert, forcing herself to memorize every word, every detail. Then, a sound shattered the silence. Police sirens, helicopters, tactical teams closing in. "Cops!" one of the kidnappers shouted. "It's a trap!" The scarred leader turned on Sarah, furious. "You brought them! You were wired! No! Sarah cried. I came alone! Chaos erupted. Guns were drawn, shouting. As the kidnappers scrambled, Sarah lunged toward Ethan. A shot rang out, missing her by inches, but she didn't stop. She ripped the tape from his mouth, freed one wrist. Run! She shouted. Hide! Gunfire exploded through the warehouse. SWAT officers stormed in. Sarah half-lifted Ethan and dragged him toward cover. Another shot. This time, it hit her. Pain seared through her shoulder as she collapsed behind crates, shielding Ethan with her body. She was bleeding badly, but alive. The scarred man fired wildly before being taken down in a hail of bullets. One kidnapper surrendered. Another was tackled trying to flee. Then, Sarah! Mark's voice. He ran to her, pale and frantic, kneeling beside her. The bank called me. I tracked your phone. I told the FBI. A paramedic arrived, treating her as she faded in and out of consciousness. They mentioned the harbor, she whispered. That's where the others are. Her info was immediately radioed to command. Sarah was stabilized and rushed to the hospital. Later, she awoke in a recovery room. Mark was by her side. Ethan, safe but shaken, sat close, hugging her gently. She asked about the other kids. Detective Garcia entered, relieved. Thanks to you, we raided several port warehouses. All the children are alive. Some need medical care, but they're safe. Then came the shock. One of the kidnappers was Ms. Torres, the teacher. Sarah was stunned. That's impossible. She had gambling debts. She gave them everything. Student records, financials, even planned the field trip, Garcia explained. She felt no remorse. Mr. Wilson, the other teacher, had no involvement. He was devastated by her betrayal. As Ethan leaned into his mother's arms, Sarah held him tightly. Their lives had been shattered, but they survived. Trust would take time to rebuild. Healing would take even longer. But for now, their family was together, and that was everything.